Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneurs Show, where we celebrate the innovators driving change in the education industry. At Edison OS, we've worked with over 500 knowledge entrepreneurs to turn their edtech ideas into profitable businesses. Hi, John. Good morning. Welcome to the Knowledge Entrepreneur Show. Thanks so much for taking time out for this.
Hey, Jack, thanks so much for having me. Good to meet you. Good to be here.
Thanks, John. It's my pleasure. John, I did a bit of reading about you as much as possible to learn about what you do and stuff. I know a lot of things, but I'm going to pretend as if I don't know for the sake of our listeners. I'm going to ask you basic questions. My first question is about you're a solopreneur and you wear multiple hats. You do a lot of things, which is one of my favorite kind of personas. So I'm going to start with how did you get to this point? Was this the plan all along, or what's the story?
Yeah, no, it was not the plan all along for sure. Um, yeah, so I'm trained as an economist. I have a PhD in economics, and worked for a few years in New York City before moving down to Washington D.C. This was 2005. And when I moved to DC, I started work at the Congressional Budget Office. And here in the states, CBO is the budget estimating arm of the U.S. Congress. So when Congress says, "Hey, we want to," we have this bill, we want to increase, spending on this program, or we want to build roads, or we want to improve, broadband infrastructure, whatever it is, CBO is the agency that says, okay, this is how much it's going to cost. And so I spent about 9 years there doing that work, and sort of focusing in some specific policy areas in the US. And I would say, like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have the same experience. Probably 5 or 6 years in, I started getting a little antsy, started thinking about some other things, and kind of started realizing that, from my perspective, our work wasn't really having the I wouldn't say the impact, but it wasn't getting sort of as much attention as I thought it should get. Right. So CBO is this like pivotal role in the U.S. budget making process, and I just felt like other groups, other agencies were getting more attention. And so I started investigating how we can improve the graphics in our regular reports. Because, like me, most of the folks that I worked with are trained as economists or political scientists or demographers, and they didn't get any training in data visualization or in presentation skills or in writing. And so I started exploring how to do that and started improving how we were doing our graphics. And then I started getting some offers to do some teaching and to do some consulting and to do some writing. And there are some pretty strict rules on what folks can do as working for the government and sort of on these side things. So I left government and I moved to a nonprofit, also here in DC. And at the same time, opened my own side sort of consulting firm, because there are also things that I can't do as part of the nonprofit work, but I can do as my solopreneur work. So it certainly was not the plan. I was, like, preparing to be an economist, an analyst, and writing papers and doing research, which I still do. But now I spend a lot of my time working in the data visualization and data science space. And there, I build different tools for colleagues that I work with at the Urban Institute, which is a nonprofit that I work at. Build tools, do trainings, and then I teach and consult with other clients and other groups around the world. So a lot of people in the similar space of working in government, working in universities, and the like. And sort of the whole goal is to help people improve how they communicate their work and communicate their data, so that they can have the impact that they want to have, and I think in a lot of cases, most cases, all cases, deserve to have, but aren't quite skilled in how to get that information out there. And I think you probably have the same challenge. Most of your listeners have the same challenge. There's so much content out there. How do we get our content to sort of cut through? And so I think that's a big impetus for a lot of people who call me, is to figure out how can we take our research or take our data and put it out there so people actually look at it and read it and engage with it.
Got it, John. It's interesting how you used the word graphics interchangeably with data visualization,
Yeah.
but it's a delicate line between graphics and data visualization, Where do you draw the line, and how did you, I mean, either you must have had exposure to data visualization while you were pursuing your economics majors, or
Mhm.
you must have had somebody guide you in the path of data visualization rather than graphic design. So how did you get the clarity between that when you started to present your data better?
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's data visualization is sort of the overlap of art and science, right? So there's the science part, that's the data. How do we work with data? How do we accurately represent the data in a way that makes sense and is clear and is objective? And then there's the art part of it. How do we make those graphs engaging? How do we make them something that someone actually wants to look at and to read? And I'm not trained as a designer by any means. So there is this whole world of infographics out there, which tend to be, at least in their sort of heyday about a decade ago, these long tower graphics that were combinations of graphs and charts, but also illustrations and icons and other sort of what we might consider sort of standard graphic design. And so sort of even having those other pieces of the icons and illustrations, but just placing it all together does sort of need a graphic design eye. I come to it more from the science side, right? Because being trained as an economist, my identity, as it were, is steeped in data. So that's where I come to it. But I wasn't real. I would say that I'm self taught when it comes to data visualization. It was really about reading. I mean, look, in terms of like, certainly writing code, self taught. Making graphs. I mean, I think most people probably start with tools like Excel and Google Sheets, and there's a drop down menu, and you select your data and you click the bar chart. Oh, I have a bar chart. Okay. So then it's about how do you think about other chart types, or how do you start making even that bar chart more engaging to people? How can you change the font or the color, or all these different pieces that can bring people into the graph? And so for me, again, not as a graphic designer, I don't really create a lot of those infographics. And when I do, they don't have a lot of that like ornamental stuff on it, right? Like all like custom illustrations. Which I'm sure if you took one of my infographics that's going to have like 6 charts on it, pretty much laid out in a grid, and you gave it to a designer, they would make it amazing. But for me, the first thing to keep in mind is who is the audience that you're trying to communicate with. And most of my audiences also tend to be data people. And so they don't necessarily need all that custom sort of graphic design. And so they just kind of want to get to the data. Now, if I worked at a private sector firm that is more, maybe needs to do using their data to do more marketing, like I think of Verizon or T-Mobile, right? Like a lot of like the cell phone and computer companies, they are creating visualizations. They're like, here's our coverage on this map, or here's why our service is better than than our competitor. That requires some more graphic design. But for me, I'm often communicating to other analysts and other researchers and policymakers. And so that sort of like more custom bespoke graphic design isn't as important to my audience, but is certainly going to be more important to other people's audiences. I will just say that if someone listening to this is also a data person and they think of themselves as a data analyst, that you can learn some basics of graphic design when it comes to say text hierarchy, and when it comes to layout and grids, and when it comes to using good colors. You can sort of learn the basics. You don't need to have a master's in fine arts to do that sort of like basic good graphic design. And I think that is worth. I've spent a lot of time sort of reading those books and those blogs and those websites to sort of get the basics. And I don't think you need to have like advanced degrees in all these different skill sets of data analysis and computer programming and graphic design and web development to be able to communicate your data in good and more effective ways.
Got it, John. John, I'm going to go back to the point where you realized, you probably had to present data better to get some attention when you were working with the
Mm,
government. Uh, but any data is, I mean, technically, data is being shown to you in whatever style that is. It's just that maybe it wasn't to your standards. But
mm,
again, you're not going to going over to the place where it's full of graphics and ornamental and all that. It's just somewhere
Right.
in between. So, how
Hmm.
bad was the data being presented while you were with the government? And what you think? What are the key, ingredients to make it decent as a data
Hmm.
visualization thing?
Yeah, I guess, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually, because I'm working with a few other groups and doing some trainings with them on improving their graphics. And I kind of like to shy away from saying something is bad versus something is good. I like to think about it as being, can we improve on it? Can we make it more effective? So I think, to answer your question, Jag, like the graphics we were making weren't like inherently wrong or terrible or ugly. They could just be improved. They could just be made more effective and more engaging. And so, what does that look like? That looks like sort of stripping out a lot of the default stuff that a lot of the tools add to the graphics. I mean, I'm not sure what sort of tools you're using over there, but like a lot of folks that I work with, obviously Excel is a big one. The R programming language is a big one. Python is a big programming language here. A lot of those tools, just using the defaults, they tend to add a lot of heavy grid lines and tick marks and all this sort of stuff that, like, a lot of that can be reduced or eliminated to make it easier to see the data. Um, so when I think about helping people create better visualizations, it's about being more effective. And also, another thing I've been thinking about is the difference between simplicity and clarity. So when I ask people, like, what makes a good graph, a lot of people say, oh, it's simple. Like, I don't know, like, what does simple mean, right? Like, there are lots of graphs out there that have a lot of data. They're complex in the data, but they're easy to read because the person has thought about how to communicate it. And so it's about clarity, not necessarily about simplicity. So that's the way that I think about it. And to the kind of latter part of your question, what are like the core things that people can do? I would say there's a lot, obviously, and like we're not going to do a whole course on this podcast, especially for a visual medium like graphics. But I will say this: if no matter what your experience is in working with data or creating graphs and charts, I think the one thing that everybody can do better, and this goes from the person just starting out to the most experienced data visualization or graphic designer or creator, is to do better with the text that we put in and around the graphs. A lot of the people and places that I work with, I'll just give you an example. A lot of people in places I work with, when they write a title for the graph, it's very simple. It's just descriptive, right? It's, you know, population. It might be a map that says population in different states in India. Okay, like, but that doesn't tell me anything about uh, the population distribution in India, right? Instead, if I said a title something like, and you're gonna have to forgive me because I am not familiar enough with with population in India states, but if I were to say something like the population in this state is the highest or has grown the fastest over the last decade, that tells me what I'm supposed to learn about the graph. And I think most people that I work with, they are in that first camp of just describing what
Right.
the graph is instead of telling me, like, what am I supposed to learn. I had a training call yesterday where someone said, well, we want the graph to be objective and we want it to be clear. And I said, well, let's look at what you wrote about in the report, because most of the people I work with, they're often writing reports. And it's always the case that in the text of the report, it says something like, in the map in figure 1, you can see that the population in this state has grown the fastest over the last 10 years. But then when you go to the map, it's just descriptive. And so part of my entire argument here is just to link that argument together, what you write in the text and what you show in the graphs, and they should just support each other. So, and there's lots of other things that we could talk about when it comes to like graphic choice and colors and text and this, that, and the other. But I think the simplest way that people can improve how they communicate their data is to think about what text they include, certainly in the title, but then also, like, what are you going to label in the graph? Are you going to point out that this bar is much taller than these other bars? This dot in this scatter plot is sits over here because of this particular reason. So that would be the one thing. That would be my primary recommendation. And then I'll also just give a shout out to there is a Twitter feed and now Instagram feed called India in Pixels. It's india.in.pixels. And it's a creator. He just creates maps of India. And I just read that. I just read that feed because I don't know enough about India. And it's just fascinating to like learn all these cool little facts about India. Although I just, gave you this example and I can't give you the distribution of population, but that's a fun Instagram feed to learn more about different data series in India.
Got it, John. Thank you very much for that. And I totally get it, when you say the title of a graph or anything for that matter should not just say what is in it, but if we can help people, um, figure out from what context should one see it. I think
Right.
that'll be great because the reason
Yeah.
I could relate to it so fast was I had a very similar situation myself in the last 2 3
Mhm.
days, where I had to talk to people about, okay, if this is the title, we were making a video, and if this is the title of the video, it's just, plain, like as you said, but there is no, at least make it a question so that
Yeah.
people know, okay, this video, you can learn something about this. But,
Yeah.
just putting a topic blandly doesn't help. And I totally get that.
Yeah, that's a really good point because I have my own YouTube channel and I've been trying to figure out like how to broaden the reach. And when you start reading about like how do you get your in particular for YouTube, but it applies to all the social media platforms, how do you get your videos to be found more easily and obviously then seen? The first thing they talk about is like getting your keywords and writing a good title that has those keywords so that when people are searching, they're not just searching for population in India. They're looking for a specific thing. And so, yeah, I mean, that's a really good example of how thinking about your titles can help people find your content. And yeah, I've been having that exact same sort of evolution over the last few months. I'll give you one other example. I have my own podcast. It's how we kind of found each other. I
Right.
have the video version of my podcast, and for a long time, the titles would just be like episode 100 colon and then Jag, right, and like that would be the title. That's not how people use YouTube or social media, right? So now the titles of my podcasts are Jane Smith talks about her book, blah 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 blah, right? And
Right.
so,
Right.
yeah, you need to be more active. You need to tell people what they're looking for and what they want to learn from that. So I think that's a great example of thinking about, just thinking about as a chart creator, how do you use the internet? Like, how do you search for things on the internet, and use that strategy for thinking about your titles. What are people searching for? And
Right.
that's, you want to answer that question for them in the title to the graph.
Yeah. Just to add, if the title can answer why someone should read that chart or watch a video, I think that pretty much solves all of the problems. Uh,
Yeah.
John, I'm still gonna go back to the
Okay.
while you were at the government job. Just one other
Mm,
unfinished topic that I want to touch upon,
mm,
and then maybe do. So your objective, the very reason you got into data visualization was the job in the first place, and looks like you want to do a lot of things, but being in government did not allow you to, do a lot of other things. And you are an economist by, education. So,
mm-hmm.
I mean, was it a complete move away from economics and diving into data visualization, or
No.
the work you do
Yeah.
in data, which in this field is very much
Yeah.
related to economics?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think the people that I worked with at in Congress were very much open to this idea of how do we improve how we communicate our data, right? And it's the reason why I am where I am now, that I had colleagues who were supportive of this and open to this idea of, because they were just like me. No one had been trained in like how do you make a better graph. No one ever thought about it, and so I was able to work with my colleagues and my managers and the director to say, let's think about a more effective way to present this information. So And then I sort of found this field of data visualization and thought more and more about it. But yeah, I haven't totally gone away from economics, so I still do economic research. My research now really focuses on two main policy areas in the U.S. Most of my work is in the U.S. Focuses on nutrition policy. So, how do we provide healthy food to kids and their families, and then also on policies that affect people with disabilities. In the U.S., we have our social security system, and part of that system has support for people with disabilities. So that's a lot of my economic research. But even my data visualization work still tends to sort of focus in the social sciences. Like I don't do a lot of data visualization in, you know, biology, right? I don't do a lot of work and sort of like, I don't even do a lot of like, I wouldn't say necessarily like big data, although I'm not sure how you define big data, but for, I would say that my work tends to be more for researchers and analysts who are creating dashboards or writing reports. I'm not and don't have the skill set to build websites and build big interactive things that you might find on here it would be like the New York Times and the Washington Post website. There it might be the Hindustan Times has a great team. So those are the sorts of there are different skill sets that are needed for all of those. So, but yeah, most of my stuff still focuses on sort of economics and social sciences.
Got it, John. John, how did you kind of chart out your areas of work, when you had to kind of transition from a
Mm-hmm.
government job to becoming your own solopreneur? So how did you identify, given that you're clear that you're not into big data and all that, you're into just
Mm-hmm.
research people and analysts, how did you draw a boundary or, get the clarity to
Uh,
yourself, okay, fine, this is what I'm going to be doing?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I mean, I think I've always found that um, being honest with yourself as a solo entrepreneur or just as an individual, like being honest about what you can do and what you want to do, where your expertise lies. So obviously, I could have said, "Oh, I want to go be a web developer," and I could go off and learn those skills, but it's not something that I really wanted to do. And I also knew like I came from this position of being an economist and working with data. And so I knew that there were lots of people who had those skills who didn't know how to create effective graphs. And so I sort of identified that as a an area of need where I could sort of help people, right? But I think the other thing is like knowing that you can't solve every problem, and address all, at least in data visualization, right? So do all of these different things is not just an opportunity to find your particular audience, right? Find your particular sort of client base, but also I think a lot of ways helps you network and connect with other people. So as an example, early on, I can remember having someone reach out to me and say, "Hey, we'd like you to come in and build this website for us, right? And we want to have these different visualizations." And I said, well, that's not really something I do, but I know three or four people who do that work, and I'm happy to connect you with them. And I connected that client with those people, and they did whatever work. But then they came back to me and said, we were able to build this website. This is great, but now we need to build the content that's going to go into that site. So can you help us build the content, right? So recognizing that maybe you can't do everything, but it is going to sort of work out in the end. I mean, I'm guessing, Jag, you have this similar experience that I have with podcasting, right? Podcasting is often just like a way to network and to find people
Yeah,
and to build relationships, right? So like, a lot of it is sort of like I don't know what the saying is there, but here it would be like, putting good vibes out in the world or good juju or
totally.
or
Yeah.
right, or like having like embracing the fate, like if you are good, if you put good out into the world, it's going to come back to you.
Yeah.
And so I think from a business perspective, networking and helping a client find, solve something and not pretend that you can do it, I think is ends up being successful in the long run.
Totally, John. Totally related to putting out good vibes or whatever. You're just putting yourself out there, and it better be good vibes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you get a lot of you hope to get a lot of positive unintended consequences,
right. That's
which
right.
is later becomes very obvious. But when you start off something like podcasting or whatever it is, you have no idea what comes out of it. But then it's everything but what you think when you start off the podcast.
That's
That's
right.
a funny thing and an interesting thing as well.
Yep.
um Now, how okay, one is, you spoke about how you defined your scope of work gonna be.
hmm
How did teaching become a part of this, John? Was that a conscious plan, or did it just happen along the way?
No, that was conscious. So, um, going through graduate school, I really enjoyed teaching as part of being a student. And then when I first moved to Washington D.C., I was teaching statistics at Georgetown University. There's a lot of universities here, so there's a lot of opportunities to sort of teach, and I just really enjoy teaching. And so, yeah, when I started my company PolicyViz, that was sort of the main goal that I had, was to teach people how to create better graphics and charts and those sorts of things. And so I do that now with private clients, but also teach in a few universities here. Yeah, so it was always sort of the goal to come in and to help people. Uh, Sort of my goal for I'd say most of my work is to empower people to create better data visualizations, right? Again, I'm not trained as a graphic designer, I'm self taught. And so I believe that anybody can learn how to create better graphs. Now, I'm not going to come in and teach someone, do a day long course in JavaScript or web development, and because I can't do it, right? So I'm not going to do that. But I am going to be able to come in and teach your team or your organization how to think about creating better graphs. And I do teach, certain tools, but for me, it is, here are the basic fundamentals of what you need to know. And it is kind of just a way of thinking, and a lot of that is about what we've been talking about, which is, who is your audience? How do you write good titles for your different audiences? Is it an academic audience? Is it are you from, Verizon or Microsoft, and you're trying to sell your product to a wide array of people? Are you trying to sell that product or sell that service in one region of the world, where certain language or a certain voice is more familiar than in another part of the world or different region? So, yeah, for me, it's really empowering people to be able to come to their task of visualizing and communicating their data with kind of a shared a knowledge, a shared language within their organization, and then be able to think about it in this way of, okay, so I want to create this graph. I can create it in 30 seconds because I'm using Excel, or I'm using Google Sheets, or I'm using this tool or that tool. Um, but just because I can create it doesn't mean it's going to be effective. So let's think about it a better way. And so, yeah, so to the core of your question, yeah, most of my work is teaching, and I sort of set out that way. And I will say, the big change that's happened over the last 4 or 5 years in my work, and part of this, it's a little bit of demand driven, but also a little bit on my side of sort of pushing this, is I will come in and teach, a 4, 6, or 8 hour workshop. And then what I have been doing more and more of lately, again, last 4 or 5 years, is to say, let's do some more follow up. So, because I can teach you the basics, but then you need to put that into practice, and you're never gonna, get better if you don't actually create more graphics and create more things. And so what I'll do now is do more of what I call office hours, which is, let's get a group or a team or just an individual in on maybe a virtual call or in person, usually virtual now, and let's work together on your graph, and let's see how we can make, improve that even, push that even further. So that follow up, and I'm sure anyone who's been a teacher knows this, that follow up is just crucially important, right? Because, yeah, I can attend a webinar or I can listen to a podcast, and then say that I took that class and then move on, but I never improve unless I keep putting it in practice. And if I have a regular check in or cadence or responsibility, then that's gonna, I'm just going to improve my skill set.
Got it, John. John, you said teaching is one of the main things that's part of your solopreneurship, and you said
Mm-hmm.
you are an adjunct professor at multiple places. Now,
Mhm.
do you have students apart from universities as well? If you do, what are your what are the channels or what are the sources, or
Yeah.
rather, where are your
So
different students from?
yeah. So I mean, it's a wide array of places that I work with. So a lot of other nonprofits, advocacy groups that will come to me. I do work with some private sector firms, in different sectors, healthcare, technology, um, and I would say that most people that I work with in with my clients tend to be the analyst level. So these are the folks that are collecting the data, they're analyzing the data, they're working with the data. It's not usually the management, right? Because management is saying, hey, we should do better at this. The management's not responsible for making it. So I tend to work with the analyst, kind of worker level of helping them. But it is a wide array of sectors. But again, primarily because of my background, tends to be more social sciences rather than you know uh, pharmaceutical companies or chemistry, chemical companies or petroleum companies or something like that. So it tends to be more on like economics, public policy, social policy sort of things.
Got it, John. John, thank you for sharing, where your students are from. Now, how do you get them? You said they come to
Yeah,
you. Is that,
yeah,
literally, do they come to you? Or if they come to you, what did you do to make them come to
yeah.
you? So,
I mean,
help
yeah,
us
this
with
is
getting students.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. This is like the core, right? This is like the whole thing about being an entrepreneur. How do you get business, right? So, and I will say, there's always room for improvement. So I'll put that out there right away. That I could still improve on this. I mean, I definitely have a lot of repeat customers, because a lot of places I work with, right, they constant churn of their staff, and so I'll teach one group, and a year later, 2 years later, they'll say, "Hey, can you come back? We have a new crop of people that we've hired. We need to get them up to speed." In terms of the marketing, I have found that advertising as a solo entrepreneur, and I should actually just pause for a second and just say that I would say, yeah, 90% of my work, 95% of my work is based in the US. So that might differ for people in different parts. This might differ for people in different parts of the world, but most of the vast majority of my work is in the US. I have found that like advertising, like paid advertising for a solo entrepreneur doesn't do much. You just don't get much out of it. So what does that mean? So it has to be more organic. So how do you do that? Well, I my first foray into this was really just a blog, right? And was writing about this content area, providing tools, providing my thoughts that could kind of turn into advice, um, and other sorts of resources. I mean, that's another thing. Same like the podcast was sort of the same sort of thought process of I'm interviewing people in the field who can provide value to listeners, which is exactly what we're doing right now. So for a solo entrepreneur, the paid advertising, I don't think really gets you very far. I think it has to be more organic. So I think it
Yeah.
has to be a lot of what we've been talking about, right? Like you could write a blog post, right? And you're going to write, let's say, a blog post about your podcast. You're not going to say the title of that's not going to be "Listen to my podcast." Like that's just not going to work, right? You need to figure out how to create that actionable, that enticing, that engaging title. I mean, I've talked to lots of firms and people working in search engine optimization and the SEO, and it's like a lot of that is a lot of just art. A lot of it is sort of guesswork and sort of figuring out what works. And I think if you have enough content, you can play around. Like there isn't like if you talked like I always would hope that I could call an SEO firm and be like, what should I put? Like, what's the answer? And there is no answer. There's no like right answer. It's just sort of playing around a little bit and seeing what works and trying different things. So, okay, so what does that mean if you're a solo entrepreneur? So I would, and again, it's going to depend on your sector, but I think a blog is a low cost, easy way to get your ideas out there, to get your name out there. You can get a website through WordPress or Wix or whatever, all these different ones, they're really cheap these days. So it's not hard to start a blog. You could also start a newsletter. I use Substack for my newsletter. It is free. You have plenty of opportunity there to do lots of different things, right? So that's another way to get your ideas out there. And then, of course, social media. And I will say that at least in the data visualization field, the data visualization on Twitter has sort of fallen apart, sort of disappeared after Elon Musk took it over, and so it's sort of now way more decentralized. But I will say, back when there was a more centralized Twitterverse, that's where I focus my attention. And so I know a lot of people say, "Oh, you should be in all the different all the different social media networks." And I just personally, I find that exhausting. I just find that exhausting. So I try to focus now. I'm sort of more focused on LinkedIn. I think that's where a lot of my target audience is located now. My wife, who has her own business, her own solo entrepreneur business. She focuses more on Instagram. That's where she is finding her audience and her network. And again, there's a lot of different theories and techniques and strategies to doing that. And I think maybe the in addition to, like, as we've been talking about, like good titles, good active things that bring people in, I think the other thing that is important is having a regular cadence. Figure out what your cadence is going to be and keep giving people that information, right? And again, back to our, like, put good things out in the world. If you put good content out there and if you help people, they're going to see that they're going to be able to get more from you. And I'll say one more thing to answer this question, and then I'll turn it back to you. Several years ago, I was at a conference, and there was a speaker there, Guy Kawasaki, who used to be, I think, like the chief evangelist of. Okay, yeah. So you know him. So Guy Kawasaki, I think he was the chief evangelist of Apple for a while, and has written a bunch of books on solo entrepreneurship. And so I got to meet him at this conference. He was a super nice guy, and he was just like willing to have a conversation. And I was telling him how I was sort of, this is pre-pandemic, so this is not like when we're in Zoom now, right? And I was telling him how I was worried. I had a lot of clients who um, wanted to record me speaking, and I said, I was worried about that because then people would be able to take that video and they would just share it, and like, I wouldn't get the business, right? They would say, "Oh, okay, so Bill has recorded this. He's just going to give the recording to Jag, and Jag is going to show it to his team, and so I won't get that business." And his response to that was, what do you think is going to happen? You think that they're going to want to do a training based on some YouTube video and not going to bring you in? So that was a big revelation to me, that what people want is not always, sometimes, but not always, just some recording, some asynchronous class. They want interaction with an instructor. They want to be
Right.
able to get feedback. And so I think that freed me up a little bit, because I think I was turning away a bit of business because of this insistence on recordings. And once I sort of got over that, it freed me up in a lot of different ways. And now I'm just more, I would say, strategic about when things can be recorded versus when things can't be recorded. And it's more on a client by client basis, and it
Right.
just it does make more sense. Um, so I guess if I had to sum all that up for someone who's just starting out, like, find whatever your preferred platform is to get content out there and to provide value to your target audience, and to find what that target audience is, right? Again, social, for me, it's social science. If you are working in the biology space, or you're working in the tech space, like, find what that audience is, and then provide them with value, and that's just going to come back, and that's going to continue. As you, for me, I'll say, like, as I work with clients, they're asking me questions, and a lot of those questions will be things that I'll think about over time and say, oh, this person asked me this really interesting question, or they had this graph and I was able to solve. It's a technical solution, or I was able to solve this thing in R or in Excel or in Tableau or Power BI or whatever it is, and now I can create that as a video or as another blog post, and it's just another way to provide content to folks.
I couldn't agree more with you about the last point that you brought up, John, because what even for, like, even to me, it took a while to realize that if you are especially, in the business of sharing knowledge, if you're teaching,
Mm-hmm.
don't be afraid of putting out there as much content as possible,
Yeah.
because in fact one of the ways some of the best teachers out there, like academic teachers, get students is just to put out everything on YouTube and simply put, for one-on-one tutoring, contact me. Now just think of it, why would students would want to go for a one-on-one tutoring when everything is out there on YouTube? There's something more to it,
Right.
right? So
That's right.
you're not going to lose anything. In fact, it's only going to help you
It's
get
only going to
people to
help
get
you.
in touch with you. So yeah, that I think that was
100%.
a, yeah, yeah, I think that's a very
100%.
important thing.
And it's also why, as I mentioned earlier, this office hour thing that I've been doing more has been sort of picking up because, yeah, I can come in and do an hour talk or do a 4 hour talk, but what if someone's working on something and they need feedback? Like they can't do that through a YouTube recording, right? Like there isn't really a lot of opportunity out there to like put something out and get feedback. I mean, you can do it on social media, but it tends to be too mean, right? Like if you're working on something and you want feedback, like how do you get that? You need a live person. You need an expert with experience in the field. And yeah, I'm totally with you. Like, and it's also like the human connection part,
Right.
right? Like I've had what I tend to do, and this will depend also. Like when I come in for these office hours, I recommend that the entire team attend an office hour. So maybe like Jag, you and I are going to work on your graph, right? And that's going to be the purpose of the office hour. But I recommend for most of my clients that the whole team attend because it may be that Bill has a similar question or can learn something from that conversation. But I've also had clients where people aren't comfortable with that, right? You might be the kind of person who doesn't want to have this sort of critique conversation in front of other people.
Right.
And I've had lots of conversations with people where, I mean, I'm definitely no therapist, but like it turns in kind of a therapy session of like, how do you deal with, and it is often managers who, you know, don't understand the value of this thing. And so a lot of it is a conversation about how do you make the case to your team or to your manager to say this is a better way. And you can only do that if there's a live person, if it's one on one, and you can have that conversation. So, but to your other point, I totally agree. Like it's not about a flood of content. So I guess I would clarify a little bit on what I said earlier. It's not just putting out as much content as you can. It's about putting out good, useful content.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because yeah, you can make a million TikToks about your garden or about playing cricket in the park, but like, see, I did recognize the India thing on cricket versus baseball, so I did do that. But like, uh, but like what is going to be useful. It's not just like everything. Put out stuff that people can use that is specific to what you are, the service you're trying to provide, or the product you're trying to get in front of people.
Right, right, John, totally. John, I'm going to come back with follow up questions to some of the things that you said about acquiring clients, putting out content. But before that, a little bit of, about data visualization, right? I just have
Mm-hmm.
one question more. Um, See, data itself is valuable, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
probably what is solving people's pain points. But is data visualization acknowledged as a solution to addressing pain points, or is it something on the periphery that people look at it as? That's one thing. Another thing
Mm.
is, what are the tangible outcomes, with data visualization? And what are people going to lose out without effective data visualization?
Okay. Yeah, those are both really good questions. Let me do the last one first. So this is also a tough one. I mean, like the goal is always to have impact, right? Like we always want to be like, we made this graph, and so that resulted in a better policy or more sales or more clients. Like that's the goal. But it's really hard to say, I created this dashboard, I created this graph, and like this thing happened, right? Like it's
Right.
usually a whole bunch of factors, right? Like that's kind of hard. I mean, we use things like page views and time on page for online visualizations, downloads for reports. I think those are all metrics. They're all imperfect metrics. They can be helpful. Um, I will say what I've been trying to do more of. and more regularly is to find those stories of impact. So, as an example, I did this. I've been writing this series of reports on equity in data and data visualization, and so I've been doing a presentation on that for the last couple of years, and I sort of have been following up with clients to say, I did this presentation for you. How are people using that content? How are they actually using it in their day to day, right? Because a lot of it is not about like, for my work, right? It's not like, oh, we sold X millions of dollars of product. It is, oh, we took the learnings from your presentation or from your workshop, and this is what we've done with it, right? We think about our data in a different way. We have taught our students to think about it in this way. And so it is, it's more qualitative than quantitative, which, as a quantitative person is not always totally satisfactory, but that's sort of what you have to do. So for that latter point, like I try to collect the stories. Um,
Right.
on the first question on pain points. Um, yeah, this is another. So is your question about how?
People's
Uh,
perception, I'd put it
oh,
like
of,
that.
of
Have they
database,
started to
yeah,
acknowledge and see the value of data visualization yet, or
yeah.
is there a little bit of convincing and pushing to do in terms of?
I think there is a little bit of convincing you need to do
Right.
because you can create a graph in 20 seconds using Google Sheets, or you can spend, I mean, I'm not going to say hours, minutes making something a little bit better. Let's just take our title, right? So I could write a title that says, this line is going, whatever the data is, right? I don't know, GDP 1950 to 2024, right? Or I could say something that, GDP has done this and has done this, and over the last 10 years has done this, right?
Right.
Okay, so it takes me a few more minutes to come up with that title.
Right.
Um, so, how do you like? I think those are the pain points of creating. How do you know whether people are using it? Again, that's like it's a tricky one. I will say that what I have found is that people, organizations should start small, get those small wins. So again, back to that client I mentioned earlier who called me like, can you build a website for me? I had several other clients who called me around that same time, like, can you help me build a website? And I'm like, you don't need a website. Like, you need a bar chart and a PDF report. Like, you don't need to go all the way to some extreme when just doing better at what you're already doing can sort of solve the problem, right? And so, how do you know that your work is being used more? I mean, again, in my particular area, it is in addition to all the metrics that you could find, but it is people seeing like, oh, my report, my article, my talk got mentioned in this newspaper or in this news report or on these 5 other blog posts, right? And so when you see, okay, so I wanted to make this line chart, but I made it this other chart type, and that thing has been picked up. Oh, okay. So now you can see, like, okay, so now we're starting to get some momentum. And I guess the other thing is, again, in my sector, because I'm working with a lot of researchers, even managers, they want the evidence. So you say, okay, let's not use this chart type. Let's use this other chart type. Okay, so, well, why? Why should we do that? And my experience has always been, I'm going to show you this alternative, and I'm going to talk you through why this graph is this chart type is fine. Nothing, maybe there's nothing wrong with it, but look at when you see it this way, you can more clearly or more quickly see the story that you're trying to tell, or it's just more engaging, or it's just more interesting. And so I've always taken the approach of let's demonstrate and then explain, rather than just sort of positing that this is better because I say it's better, right? I'm going to actually demonstrate, and that's going to take some time, right? You're going to have to go in and make both versions. You're going to have to demonstrate to the manager, here's the original and here's the new one, and this is why I think this new one is better. But again, even in that process, I learned certain things, right? Like maybe in my head, I was like, we should try this other graph. Actually, it doesn't work better, right? But I think demonstrating is always the way to sort of try to help. I'm not going to say solve, but lessen those pain points,
Right.
because you are showing people and you've done the work, right? And you're showing them that we have a solution to this particular problem.
Got it, John. Thank you for that. John, coming back to, acquiring clients, you said, writing a blog post can be as simple as writing a blog post, or, you're focusing more on LinkedIn. Now, when you
Mm-hmm.
come to the aspect of writing content, putting out content, there are two things. One is what you really love and like and what excites you. And then there's another
Mm-hmm.
actual thing. What do people are actually looking for? So,
Yeah.
have you struck a balance on that front yet, or how do you navigate that these two things?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, fortunately for me, a lot of that overlaps, right? Like the stuff I like writing about
Great.
is what people are interested in. But I'll give you a good example. Like you see a lot, if you go onto social media, you see a lot of people writing, the 10 things you need to know about XYZ, right? It might be about data visualization. That stuff, while maybe gets circulated a lot, doesn't interest me as much, right? Because I've written all those blogs and I've written books about data visual. So I'm sort of trying to think more deeply. I mean, I think it's a really good question. I mean, I think you want to try in some ways to bring people along with you in your journey of being better at what you do. And what I mean by that is, I no longer really write, here are the top 10 graphs or these things to do. I'm now writing about, what we've been talking about, difference between simplicity and clarity, or how to write better titles, or, thinking about equity in your data, or, how to represent people. Like, what's sort of the next level? Because when I started, that blog post on 10 best things about data viz, that's where I was in my learning curve, right? And so you take people along on your journey, and it's also why I think a lot of repeat clients, because when they bring me back, my work is evolving, the way I teach is evolving, right? The content that I present is evolving, and that there's more to learn. So it's I I think when you're starting out, there is a desire or a strategy to sort of find the content that's going to reach a wide range of people, and I think that's what you have to do. And maybe when you're starting out, that works because you are also starting out and you're starting to sort of build this audience, right? But once you find your audience, bring them along with you as your thinking and your skill set evolves, because we're all evolving, we're all changing, we're all learning. And I think your audience wants to see that from your customers, your clients, your audience wants to see that as well. And I mean, I'm sure I'm hopefully adding new people to my audience, but they can go back to those early posts, and I'll of course reference them. But I want to bring you along with me into what I'm thinking about now. What are the new challenges? I mean, if you are someone who's writing about JavaScript, for example, 10 years ago, what you would write about JavaScript is totally different than what you would write today, right? Like the technology has changed, the way we use the internet has changed, and so I've always sort of felt that what I'm thinking about, the challenges that I'm facing, the challenges that clients are facing, other people are facing it too, and I'm going to write about those challenges and try to I mean, not always solve, but try to solve those challenges. And I guess the other thing I would say is, uh, don't and I forget about this, so I'm not always very good at this. So this is really more for me maybe than for other people. But like, you don't have to publish something as soon as you think about it or
Right.
finish that video or that blog post, right? Like, I always have this instinct, like, oh, I wrote this really good blog post, I want to get it out in the world, and so just click publish, right? We're like, it's sometimes maybe I should hold on to that, especially if like it's going to link to a conversation that's coming up. I'll give you one example from my work at Urban, or actually not my work, but colleagues' work. This is several years ago. There was this debate here in the States about during the Trump administration about adding a question to the U.S. Census about immigration status. It was a big debate. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and some of my colleagues were doing some research on what the impact of adding that question could be. And the report was done, I want to say in like March. but the Supreme Court decision wasn't going to come out until like June. So we just held on to the report and just waited because we knew there was going to be this huge conversation once that came out. And of course, it's different if you're a solo entrepreneur. I'm not the Supreme Court, so it's not going to get picked up everywhere. But, maybe if I did a couple of graphs recently about Formula One racing. And so I put that stuff out like when the qualifying was taking place for the last race in Australia, right? So I'm trying to like kind of key in on events and the discussion that's taking place rather than just saying, I got to publish it as soon as I can. Sometimes I forget about that and I just get excited and I just click publish. But like usually I'm trying to remember that I'm not, apple.com. I'm not target.com, right? I'm not whitehouse.gov, right? If I don't put something out on my website today, or if my website stalls for a little bit, like it's not that big of a deal, right? So I think it's just a matter of sort of like finding your right cadence, but also recognizing that you don't have to put it out right away. And that also helps with sort of building out a backlog. I would say I will stop in a second. I will say, especially if you're starting out, you're thinking about building a social media presence or you're building a blog, don't just say, I have one blog post, I'm going to publish it. Write maybe a dozen.
Yep.
Like have them ready to go so that, you're going to publish every week. Okay, so if you have a dozen blog posts, that gives you 3 months to start writing more blog posts. Again, that regular cadence is really important. So when you're starting out, if you're just getting on Twitter or LinkedIn, like have a bunch of things sort of ready to go in your pocket so that when people go to your Twitter profile, they see why they should follow you, or to your Instagram page, why they should pay attention to you, rather than John put out this blog post on bar charts, and I go to his Twitter page, and there's just this like one thing, like that doesn't really inspire me as a person to like follow that person. So if you're just starting out, I would definitely recommend building up sort of a backlog of content and then figuring out where your cadence is, because you're just going to have to keep it up. And that's the challenge of being a solo entrepreneur, is keeping up that content, that content engine. And if you can start without feeling rushed that you have to now create more stuff right away, it gives you a little bit more freedom, because the hardest part is right at the beginning. It's a very steep curve at the beginning to not just put out content, but to put out content to work with clients, to network, to figure out all of your billing and your invoicing and your payments, all that. Like there's a whole, ecosystem of things that you need as an entrepreneur to make the business run. And the last thing you want to have to worry about when you're getting just on your feet is, man, I have to write another blog post because I only have one and I need to create more. So, so that would be my recommendation for people, especially for people just starting out, is like, get that backlog, get that library of stuff ready to go.
Got it, John. Totally. I mean, it's not just the reader who's gonna be, feel more inclined to read your stuff if you've got more published consistently. Even as a creator, as a publisher, it's a motivating factor for you to see 12 posts ready, and it's like, okay, I've done so much, I just have to add on to it or build onto it, rather than just having one and then having to sit down to write again to publish another one. So it works like that 100%. As well. John, I wanted to, as a solopreneur, it's a well-known fact that you have to wear a lot of hats, but I just want to touch upon this one specific hat under the marketing thing. You have your own podcast as well. My question about that is, why did you want to start the podcast? And after spending whatever time that you've spent on podcasts,
that's a guy who has a podcast and knows. Yeah, that's a guy who has a podcast and knows how much work it is. Yeah, and what's changed? So it's interesting because I started the podcast. I did like 2 or 3 what I was just calling like data conversations, and they were just with like friends that I knew, and like this is a long time ago. So I was just in person, just recording them, maybe even on my iPhone, just as like a voice memo, and publishing them. And then someone was like, "Why are you not doing this as a podcast?" So that was like, yeah, that makes more sense. So the first question, why a podcast? my podcast has been going on for 10 years now. So at
Wow.
the time, like, podcasts were like a big thing, and then they sort of died off for a little bit, and now they're like definitely back, right? Everybody has a podcast now. So when I sort of started my podcast, there weren't many data podcasts out there. So I think that was like there is an opportunity here. I will also say, um, well, we'll get to how hard it is, but I will say that sometimes doing a podcast is easier than writing a blog post, right? Like
Yeah.
you and I are just having a conversation rather than having to write and edit and do all that stuff. Um, so like I said, I like teaching, and podcasts are partly teaching, right? Like you are. I mean, in this conversation, my job as the guest is to sort of teach your listeners about what I do and how I think to go about it. And your job is, as the interviewer or as the host, is to pull on those threads to help your audience learn those things. So it is podcasting is teaching. I mean, at least the way that I think you and I do our podcast, which is generally interview format, and you're trying to get people to share their experiences and their wisdom. So I think it is kind of teaching. Now, to the harder question, which is what has changed. I mean, a lot has changed. The algorithms, especially that iTunes uses, has changed. I think it was in 2020 maybe or 2019 they changed a couple of things that definitely affected things. The tools have gotten way better. So we're right now recording on Riverside. I record on a very similar tool called Zencaster. When I first started out, I was using Skype, and
Right.
like the problem with Skype is that it records one conversation. So like if your connection isn't great, you hear these like gaps. But like Riverside, Zencaster, all these tools, they record locally. So
Right.
even if, yeah, so like the technology has gotten better. Um, and I would say like the different types of ways that you can get content out there has helped. Like, now Spotify, which is such a big player, you can get your podcast on Spotify, which is a lot easier than it used to be. Then there's YouTube. I mean, someone once told me like, "Hey, you need to put your podcast on YouTube," and I'm like, "Who's watching a podcast?" But people do it. Like they either watch it or maybe they play it and they're just listening to it, and it's
Yeah.
easier than they don't want to use. Well, like whatever it is. So it's changed a lot. There's a lot more resources out there to learn how to do better and how to identify your audience and all the technology that's used. Um, but I would caution folks to that it. I mean, I'm sure you could talk about this well. Like, it's not easy. like, like even for one, I'm sure your show is very much like my show, right? You identify a potential guest. You reach out to the guests. Hopefully they say yes. If they say yes, then you have to figure out when to schedule the conversation. Then you might want to do some pre-work. You got to look, like you said, right? You look into the guest. You may send them some questions beforehand. Then you do the recording. Then you edit the recording, right? You got to put on the opening and the closing. Maybe you make a video. Then you got to do all the social marketing stuff, right? I mean, it is a lot of work. So
Right.
it is not like for the faint of heart. But I will say, and this is the last thing I will say, is that I think the AI tools, and this is in the last like 6, 8 months, the AI tools have become so much better and so much useful for podcasting. And I'll give you a good example. Um, for transcriptions for my show, I was paying a firm to do the transcriptions by hand because the AI tools they weren't very good. But they've gotten so much better that now I just have a tool that I use. I create my final episode. I drop the audio file into this tool. It creates the transcript, and it's also using like Chat GPT to generate a summary and some titles and a blog post. And like I don't use all of it, but it certainly it certainly helps for not at least the transcript. It makes things a lot cheaper and faster, and I have more control. And then depending on the tools, you can say, hey, take this. You could like feed your transcript into Chat GPT and say, hey, give me 5 title recommendations, right? And so you have that sort of thing. So I think the AI, at least on the production side, has made things a lot easier, but also the over these last 10 years, the podcast space, there's just way more podcasts, so it's harder to find your spot. And so my recommendation would be to a know what you're getting into. It is not easy. It takes a lot of time. And B, find your niche, right? Like if you're the New York Times or your Barstool Sports or your ESPN, like you have a built-in huge audience. The 99% of the rest of us are fighting for our little niche, right? So if you're coming in and saying, I'm going to, my podcast is for everybody, that's not going to work, right? Like
Right.
find who you are trying to help and trying to communicate with and focus on that group. Because saying, yeah, I'm gonna be ESPN is just not a reasonable or feasible goal. But know what you're getting into because it's a lot of work. But I find it a lot of fun. I mean, I'm guessing you find it a lot of fun too, right? Like, having like
Absolutely,
conversations with you
I
is
love
great.
it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
most of the times, majority of the podcast episodes are amazing for me.
yeah.
Some of them are, maybe not as much as what you expect, but most
Mm-hmm.
often than not, it's amazing. I walk away learning so much more. I mean, and it's great. Basically, it's great to.
Yeah,
I love asking questions, and I think it's the easiest thing just to ask questions, sit back, and listen to whatever the guest has to say.
exactly. Yeah. It is. Yeah. The actual like interviewing part is the most fun for sure. So if you have a team who can do all the other stuff for you, I mean, I have someone who edits my audio for me, so make sure the levels are all right and
Right.
cuts out any any mistakes or whatever. But all the other stuff I'm doing. So if you have a team behind you, it definitely makes that helpful. And I totally agree. Like the fun part is the interview and also getting the free stuff. Like I interview a lot of authors and so I'm like, yeah, I need a copy of your book so I can like craft some questions for you. And so now for those who are watching this, I've got a lot of books in the
I see a
back
lot
out
of
of my
books.
office. So yeah, a lot of books. So yeah, so it's, but it is, I agree with you, it is rewarding and I learn a lot. I mean, and back to our previous point of this conversation, it can also generate a lot of further content for me, right? Like I'll
Exactly.
talk to someone and we'll have a conversation, be like, oh yeah, I should. That's a really interesting point, and then go do some more research on it, maybe write some more on it, and build some more. So yeah,
And John, you know what I've discovered is this very interesting and funny thing as well. Nobody is going to get on a call with you if you just want to have a conversation just like that. But add this guise of podcast, irrespective of the kind of audience it has or whatever it
hundred
is, you just
percent.
make it a formal recording and stuff like that. People are
Yeah,
willing to do it. So
yeah,
I see podcasting becoming a major part of sales processes going forward. The very first conversation, instead of a cold call, imagine you have them uh, as a guest on your podcast and you use that
yeah.
time to kind of understand their business. I think that's the
I
most interesting thing.
100% agree. I mean, I'm guessing your guests are like my guests. When I reach out to someone, no one ever says, "Well, how many downloads do you get?" Right? Like now, unless I'm reaching out to like someone super
95% of them,
fancy,
not really. Yeah.
no, it is an opportunity for them. Again, like from my perspective as a guest on your show, this is really easy. I come in and talk about stuff I know. So like I don't really have to come in and prepare. It's an hour out of my day. I come in, talk, and then, some number of people will listen to this, right? And some fraction of those folks will go to my website or go to my newsletter. And so it is worth it even for broadening your audience even if it's just a little bit. It's not a huge investment in your time, but I totally agree with you. Like no one ever
Yeah.
asks, well, how many
And
downloads do you get? Like
the worst thing that can happen is you are going away with some content. You have
right,
you like somewhere that you've spoken about something. Well,
yeah,
you have your content. You can just use it
yeah,
as a
that's
reel,
right.
short, whatever it is.
I mean, I'm sure you've had the same thing. There are some interviews that you're just kind of like, whew, like let's just get through it, like
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's okay because also I've had, it's interesting that you say that because I've had a couple of interviews where I think the episode is kind of like blah, but ironically those interviews are sometimes the ones that get the most, not the most attention, but like I'll have people
Totally.
reach out to me because like it's interesting to them. Like maybe it's not as interesting to me, but it's
Right.
interesting to them. And so fine, okay, like that's the whole point, right? Is to provide value to people who are listening. So
Yeah.
I, and so it's all good. But I totally agree with you. It's a great way to network and to have conversations with people or potential clients that, yeah, maybe they won't jump on a phone call with you, but if you say, hey, I'll interview you for this show, yeah, maybe that's the way to make the connection for sure.
John, final question, concluding
Okay.
one. The good, bad, and the ugly of being a solopreneur. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. So okay. So the good, I mean, the flexibility is the best part, I think. Right. And of course that differs on depending on where you are in your solo entrepreneur journey. Right. If you're right at the beginning, it's a little bit different than you're 5-10 years into it. But the flexibility is great. Right. If you especially now that virtual consulting is much more prevalent than I think it was before the pandemic. If you don't want to travel that week, great. If you are willing to do it, you can jack up your price or something like that. Like there is the flexibility of that. The bad, the bad is, you're always working. Like that is it. You're on your own. You're always working. And so you want to take a day off from work. Then well, that's the day you're not making any money. So that's
Yeah.
that's just the way it is. But again, like if you want to start your day at noon rather than 9 a.m., like you have the flexibilities. But the bad is you're not making money. And I will say at least here in the United States, part of that is we do not have universal health care. So health insurance is a big challenge for for solo entrepreneurs because you have to go buy health insurance in the private market. So that's different. That's harder. The ugly, I mean, again, I'm a little bit different because I have sort of a backstop of another job. I mean, I think the ugly is so maybe the bad is at least in the states the no health insurance, and the ugly is you're always working. You're always working. You're
Right.
always on. You're always trying to find that next lead, that next thing. But for me, and I will also say my wife, who's not here, she's out working with her clients today. The good of being able to set your own schedule, of doing something that you love, of helping people outweighs the bad and the ugly. But yeah, I think that's how I'd think about the different aspects of being a solo entrepreneur.
Got it, John. John, I'm so sorry. I'm just going to have one more question because,
Oh, one more. Okay, yeah.
I already had this thought. I was like, the moment you said even your wife is a solopreneur, I was like, oh, wow, it's so cool because, you can actually get each other what it is to be like a solopreneur and stuff like
Yeah,
that. But I don't want to make that
yeah.
assumption. So is it really good that a couple, both of them are solopreneurs, or what do you say? I mean, or is it because it just
Yeah.
occurred? Okay, both of them are running a risk,
Right,
in a certain
right.
way.
So again, like so I want to make clear, like I have a full-time job as well. So that has the backstop of like a regular salary and health insurance.
Right.
Um, and also we are in very different industries. She's in healthcare and I'm in data visualization, right? So I think if you are solo entrepreneurs in the same sector, maybe even working in the same business, the risks are even higher, right? The
Right.
highs and the
Right.
lows are even higher. Um, so I think there are probably other people who can speak more to that. I will say that that one of the big advantages is because I've been doing this a lot longer than she's been doing it. A lot of the things that we've been talking about, I've been able to share with her mostly my failures, right? So
Right.
one of the things is on this thing we talked about earlier about having a stock of content, right, ready to
Yep.
go. So she is currently working on writing a whole bunch of blog posts, so sort of set up on her existing site. Having said that, her Instagram feed is amazing, right? And she's gotten so many more followers on Instagram in the last year and a half that I have total, right? Because that's like where she has found her audience. So you sort of learn from each other. But like as another example, like all of my invoicing and billing and all that stuff, like all of my Excel templates and invoice templates, like I've just given to her because now she can just use it. So there is like a lot of economies of scale of learning from having two solo entrepreneurs, but as you mentioned, the risks are higher. If we want to go on a family vacation, neither of us are working that week, so like
Right.
that's the trade-off. But again, you do in some ways have kind of a team behind you, right? If you think about
Yeah.
just even that blog post, she's read all of my books, right? She's read all of my books as I was writing them, right? So you have like, and of course, you have a built-in fan, like your partner, your spouse, your family is rooting for you to succeed. And so that, of course, that emotional support is there to help you, and to urge you on. So it's hard. Again, there's a good and the bad on this, but I think if you can find something that you love and find something that helps people, the good is going to outweigh the bad.
John, thank you so very much. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the
Yes,
podcast. It was lovely
it was
talking to you,
great
John.
to chat. All right, thank you, sir. It was great to chat.